Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to moderate this panel with you this morning on such an important topic. And we have seen so much action. There have been so many developments on the life issue over the past 12 months. Many of you will recall laws like the extreme abortion bill that was passed by the legislature in the state of New York and some other states. We recall the comments of Virginia Governor Ralph Northam on infanticide. Here at the federal level, we have the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act introduced at the federal level. You'll be hearing more about that later today. More recently, just in September, the family of the late abortion provider, Dr. Ulrich Klopfer, discovered over 2,000 unborn children in plastic bags in his garage. This shocking tragedy serves as a reminder of the pressing need to have their dignity recognized. And also recently, the Supreme Court just agreed to hear the June Medical Services versus G. This is the biggest abortion case in years and is the first big abortion case the Supreme Court has accepted since President Trump filled 2 seats with Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. We are very hopeful that the Supreme Court will affirm the Fifth Circuit and uphold Louisiana's ability to protect women, and this could be a significant ruling on behalf of the unborn. All that to say, in recent months, we've seen this issue at center stage many times, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways, but every single time there have been state legislators like the ones on our panel this morning who have stood up and said, we are going to do something about this. We are going to stand for the unborn. A couple of numbers I'd like to share with you really quick. Just this year in 2019, there have been 36 pro-life laws supported by FRC Action that have been signed into law. In over the last 9 years, we have seen 1/3 of all of the pro-life laws that have been enacted since Roe versus Wade. 1/3 of those have happened over the last 9 years. I think those are some things we can get excited about. On our panel this morning, we have both Republicans and Democrats represented on this important issue, showing that the issue really transcends party lines. And they have stood up to send a clear message. We are standing for the unborn. We are winning hearts and minds, and we are building an American future that is pro-life. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists this morning. First, we have Senator Jessica Dela Cruz of Rhode Island. She's representing the state's 23rd district. She is a first-generation American born to Portuguese immigrants, self-employed, and lives in North Smithfield with her husband and 3 children. She is a political newcomer, having been elected last fall and beginning her term as a freshman senator in January of this year. She stepped into public service after years of civic engagement and activism, working to restore faithfulness to the United States and Rhode Island constitutions. She now serves on the Senate Committee on Judiciary and the Senate Committee on Labor. In the 2019 session, she actively opposed and voted against Senate Bill S-152, a bill that dramatically expanded abortion access while weakening existing public protections under the guise of protecting Roe versus Wade. Please join me in welcoming Senator Dela Cruz. Next, we have Katrina Jackson, who is both an attorney and state representative representing Louisiana's 16th district, and I also understand a senator-elect now, so congratulations on that. She was first elected in 2011. She serves on numerous committees and is the chair of the House Committee on Judiciary. Known as a tough negotiator, she hasn't shied away from leadership and is a fighter for her values and for her constituents. At home, you can find her fighting for clients in criminal and civil law cases and spending time educating, working with, and listening to her constituents. She has received numerous awards, including the Defender of Life for the 2014 legislative session from the Louisiana Right to Life, and has twice received the Life and Liberty Award from the Louisiana Family Forum. Katrina attributes her accomplishments to not just having a dream, but having a dream that lines up with God's plan for her life. Every day, she works to allow God to guide her in the process of realizing that dream. Please join me in welcoming Representative Jackson. And lastly, we have State Representative Pat McElraft from North Carolina. She represents North Carolina's 13th House District. She was first elected in 2007, and she serves as Vice Chairman of the North Carolina House Appropriations Committee, as well as Chairman of the Appropriations, Agriculture, and Natural and Economic Resources Committee and the Environment Committee. Among other achievements, she was awarded the North Carolina Right to Life Pro-Life Legislative Excellence Award in 2011 and the North Carolina Heart of a Friend Advocacy Award in 2016. She is also a member of the National Pro-Life Women's Caucus. She has been married for 53 years to her retired Marine Colonel Roger McElraft and has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Representative McElraft. Well, I'd like to jump right in with the panel here. Senator Dela Cruz, if I could start with you and if we could just work our way on down the table. First question, I'm wondering if you could tell us your story personally. Why is this issue, the issue of defending the unborn, the pro-life issue, why is this so important to you, and what led you to get involved with this?
Well, for me, it's a no-brainer. You know, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when I think, you know, back on history and great civil rights movements of our times, I think of William Wilberforce and how he fought to stop the slave trade, and how it was the great injustice of their time. And the great injustice of our time is the abortion issue. Thank you. You know, I always think, what's next? It's always a slippery slope. It's never, we're not going to just stop at abortion. What's next? I mean, are we talking about disabled individuals? Are we talking about elderly individuals? Are we talking about individuals that are sick? Who decides who lives and who dies? I think that when I look back at what's happening in Rhode Island, Planned Parenthood, the Women X Project, they're not happy with just obtaining abortion on demand. They're going to take it further. Next is euthanasia, and I just don't know where it will stop.
Thank you. Representative Jackson, if we could ask you the same question.
It's as simple as this for me. God hates the shedding of innocent blood. And so I always said that whatever God hated, Katrina Jackson was going to hate too. And so this was not a political issue for me. It was not based on a party. It was based on my Christianity. I believe, as Senator Dela Cruz believes, it's an injustice. And when I'm talking to people who don't understand that or who don't identify with the sovereign God that we serve, I tell them all the time, well, someone chose you. If you were born out the Roe versus Wade, someone chose you. And would you have not wanted us to fight for you? And so for me, I not only fight for the unborn. When you fight for life, you fight for yourself as well, because someone had a choice not to choose you. I don't think it should ever be a time where someone other than God should determine whether or not you're born. And that's what it came to me. And so it's just that simple. That's why I'm pro-life and will always be.
Thank you. Representative McElraft.
Thank you. Mine is a little different. I grew up in a Christian family in Oklahoma originally, and we never even heard the word abortion. We had no idea what abortion was. Even as a young mother of 2, my husband was a Marine. We were at Parris Island, South Carolina, and some Roe v. Wade passed, and one of my friends said something about abortion, and I started reading more about it, didn't understand it, but read that it was only a piece of tissue. It wasn't a baby. So didn't think much more about it until We moved to Camp Lejeune with my husband's job in the Marine Corps. When they tell you to go, you go. And I was doing my practical. I was getting a degree in medical lab technology. And we went to the hospital to do our practical. And when I did, I was on a break one day and went into the pathology laboratory to visit with the pathologist. And we had just moved to North Carolina, and there's a lot of, from the person that laughed about North Carolina or clapped a while ago, you know about pig picking in North Carolina, so my mind was kind of focused on pigs. But the saddest part is when I went in there, I looked around, just glanced around in the pathology lab, and I saw buckets and buckets and buckets with little pink flesh in them, and I thought they were little pigs. I truly did. I said, "What are you doing with all these little pigs in here?" And he said, "Pat, look again. That's the weekend's abortions." Their babies, the little babies' bodies were so burned because in those days, that was in the 70s, late 70s, they were doing abortions with saline. And we would have to do blood gases on them, try to keep them alive as much as we could. There were stories from nurses where the doctor, if they were born alive, he would try to turn them over in the saline. There was no firsthand knowledge about this, but these stories were from nurses that worked in there. Many nurses stopped working for him. He continued on many years in the abortion industry. I don't even like to call him a doctor. I call him an abortionist. Doctors are for saving lives. From that moment on, I realized this was not a piece of tissue. Girls were hitchhiking down from New York to come to Jacksonville, North Carolina, the home of the Marine Corps and the home of the biggest abortionist in the nation. He got shut down by the IRS a few years ago. We couldn't do anything to shut him down. There were pickets, there were all kinds of things. He did stop doing the late-term abortions, we think. But he got shut down by the IRS, so that's the one thing about the IRS I like. But from that point on, I decided that I would be a pro-life advocate. So I've dedicated my life in the legislature. I'm going to run one more term. There's some legislation that we have not been able to finish because we have a governor who is not pro-life. And he has vetoed everything we've done, so we're going to work on that legislation. So I've dedicated my next term, if I'm reelected, to making sure that we do everything we can to save those babies' lives.
Thank you so much for that. Next question for you all. We saw that video of the map with a lot of the legislative developments, not all of them, across the country. In all of your states, in recent months, over this past year or so, there have been some significant things happening at the legislative level on this issue specifically. So could you unpack that specifically for us? What action has the legislature been doing, and what has your role been in that? Senator De La Cruz, if we could start with you again.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to write them down because the legislation did several things. And first, it eliminated any meaningful restrictions on post-viable abortions, post-viability. Now abortions can be performed for undefined reasons, health undefined, which could really include mental health, familial health, financial health, or emotional health. Eliminated any constitutional restrictions on the methods of abortion, and also any penalties for experimenting on human fetuses. One of the pieces of the legislation also diminished the role of the Department of Health and making it so that the Department of Health couldn't adopt abortion-specific health and safety regulations. So I submitted an amendment in which would clear up the language so that those standards could be adopted. So I called the Department of Health, and I said, I'd like the last 10 years of inspections for Planned Parenthood. And she said, well, that's easy, there's only 2. But they're supposed to be inspected every year. And on the floor I said, Planned Parenthood's motto used to be safe, legal, and rare. Then it was safe and legal. But can we really call it legal if we're putting language into our legislation that prevents the inspection of a facility that performs surgical and chemical procedures? Can we really say we care about women when restaurants are held to a higher standard of cleanliness? Is it true that McDonald's is going to be held to a higher standard than these clinics that provide care for our women? Safe, legal, and rare. Now it's just come to the point where it's just legal. Unfortunately, my amendment did not pass, but I will continue to fight for this legislation, and thank you. And lastly, what did the legislature do? Well, Common Cause Rhode Island, which is more of a left-leaning watchdog group, said it was unprecedented what the Senate did. We had 2 bills, the House and the Senate bill, which mirrored each other. The first time the Senate bill died 5-4 in committee, and then they made some minor tweaks in which they said were substantial changes, which were not, and the House bill was brought back to the Senate Judiciary. There were enough votes again to kill that bill in committee. And seconds before an up or down vote, they decided to switch it to another committee. Now, bills do move from committee. If they come to judiciary and they're not meant to be there, then we move them. But that's when we receive the bill, not seconds before an up or down vote. What happened was they didn't have the votes, and so come hell or high water, they were going to make sure that that bill was sent to Health and Human Services, which has always been heard in judiciary, and where 7 of the 9 members were self-professed liberals or progressives. So we have a fight in Rhode Island, and elections have consequences, and we need to hold our elected officials accountable.
Representative Jackson.
Yes. Well, Louisiana hails as the #1 pro-life in the union, and so honestly, in Louisiana, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, 2/3 of our legislature are pro-life. And so we've been able to push very meaningful legislation. We just had Senator Milkovich to author and pass the heartbeat bill with no exceptions besides the life of the mother. And Governor Edwards signed it into law about 3 or 4 months ago. And so only required a majority vote, but we had an overwhelming supermajority vote in favor of that bill in both chambers. We also right now have the Love Life Amendment. We call it the Love Life Amendment. That was my bill that I authored, working with the Family Research Council, the Right to Life in our state, and everyone else, which is going to give all voters for the first time an opportunity to vote on whether Louisiana is pro-life. It's going to put language in our Constitution that says that Louisiana is a pro-life state. So we're very excited about that. And that actually comes up during the 2020 presidential election. So for the first time, our constituents will get to vote on the issue that we always vote on as elected officials. You want to learn more about that amendment, the website is lovelifevoteyes.com, lovelifevoteyes.com. And so we are pushing efforts right now to make sure our constituency is informed and ready to vote in 2020 to place that in our Constitution. Also, I authored the Admitting Privileges Bill. In our state, our Admitting Privileges Bill was upheld by the 5th Circuit, and we just heard about 5 days ago that it's going to be heard at the United States Supreme Court. And so we are prepping for those arguments and waiting on a date. But what Louisiana has done is we understand until it's overturned that Roe versus Wade is right now the law. And so what we've done over the last 20, 30, 40 years was pass meaningful legislation that placed every restriction on abortion that we could. A lot of those laws have been upheld. We have a 24-hour waiting period. You can't perform an abortion after a certain time in Louisiana. And of course, with the heartbeat bill, ours doesn't go in effect until I think it's Alabama or Mississippi, goes into effect. We put a provision in the law because we are right now litigating a number of cases that I just mentioned, and so we partnered with our neighboring state to litigate that issue. And when they litigate it, whatever the outcome is for theirs, that will be the outcome for ours. So that's what our state has been doing. And every year in the state of Louisiana, we come together. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Democrat, or Republican. Doesn't matter if you're from a rural area or urban area. We come together as a supermajority of the legislature with a Democratic governor who's pro-life. And we pass legislation that saves lives. And we do it not ignoring our constituency, but educating our constituency and bringing them along with us. And that's why the Love Life Amendment for us is so important, because they've always said in the national media, well, you've done it as a legislature, but how do your constituents feel about it? Well, we know that our constituents are holistically pro-life. And so for the first time in 2020, they'll get to say that. And when we are talking about it and we're on the floor, we say we advocate for those back home. In 2020, they'll advocate with us. And it'll be resounding in the Louisiana Constitution that Louisiana, its constituents, are pro-life.
Representative McElraft.
Thank you. When I came in, we were in the minority. The Republicans were in the minority. And in 2010, we actually got a governor, a House, and a Senate that were conservative Republicans for the first time in 140 years. So we decided to get busy doing pro-life legislation as quickly as we could, as long as we had that kind of a majority in both chambers and also the governor. There was nothing stopping us. So we started out doing a woman's right to know. And that was just a simple bill that says the doctor, if a woman wants to see her ultrasound, she should be able to see it. And what was really ridiculous is we required them to have them, but they were never, the abortionist was never required to show them to the mother. And we know why they didn't want them to see them, because they would see it was a baby. It is not a piece of tissue. It is not a cell that's growing. It is a baby. And so that actually, with the 72-hour wait law that we have also, that really saved about 3,500 babies a year, because they would go to the pregnancy centers to get their ultrasound. They would get counseling there. They would get help there to raise their children singly or adoption and get the counseling they need, jobs, financial support, the things that the pregnancy centers do. We don't just take them in and tell them, let's kill your baby, that's the easiest way out. Because that's what Planned Parenthood does. And I'm not afraid to say it, that's what Planned Parenthood does. It's all about the money. Planned Parenthood is all about the money. Well, we now have a governor of a different party. We don't have supermajorities in the House or the Senate, so we said, what can we do that this governor won't veto? And so we decided to do the same thing that they did at the federal level, just mimic that bill almost 100%, and that was the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act. And we got a bipartisan bill. We got 5 Democrats to vote with us, and the governor vetoed it. The governor vetoed it. All the bill said is that you have to give the same protection to a baby that's born from an abortion that you give to a baby that is born from any other procedure, life, natural, childbirth, whatever, at the same gestational age. Don't throw them on the table. Don't put them in a closet. And we've heard stories. You'll hear from Claire today, and others, maybe today, tomorrow, I don't know, but others who are survivors of abortions, that it is happening now. It is not from 40 years ago, my story. It is happening now. They are putting them in closets. They are turning them over in a wet solution, whatever, anything, and not paying any attention to them. And they are having their last breaths without anyone caring for them. So how we got this bill passed, it started in the Senate. Senator Joyce Krovic, a great friend of mine, she should be here rather than me, but anyway, she was the one that took the lead on this. We had a House version of it too, but she took the lead on the Senate, and then we were going to take the lead on a couple of other, the dismemberment bill and the abortion pill reversal bills. We had our whole pro-life legislation set for this year, but we knew there was a chance he was going to veto. What we did is we got churches to help us. We got the North Carolina Values Coalition under Tammy Fitzgerald, some of you may know her, and Barbara Hope from North Carolina Right to Life. And they got the masses together, and they started going out, and they got everyone together. But what did we do to really get our whole caucus involved? Was prayer. We asked God to guide us in every bit of this effort. We were successful in getting it passed. The governor is the one who has it on his heart now, that babies will die in North Carolina that may not have had to die. And so our other two pieces of pro-life legislation we were going to go do this year, we know they will probably be vetoed, so we are sitting on them for a while. We did not have enough of the Democrats that voted with us to go for the override. We were lacking one. We did we did vote to override it, but we lacked that one vote. So prayer, getting everyone involved. We had pro-life rallies with African-American churches, white churches, all of them, everybody together praying. But the governor and his political talk with them about, he actually would sit someone across from them and say, this is who I'm running against you if you vote to override the veto. So, like I say, as the governor in Virginia, the governor of North Carolina has this on his hands now.
Appreciate all the answers there. We've got just a couple minutes left, so one final question for you. It's interesting, we have three very different scenarios here. We have Senator De La Cruz, your effort to stop a bad bill that did go into effect. Representative Jackson, you have been able to get good life legislation passed, and you've got that vote coming up in 2020. And then Representative McElraft, the legislature was able to get a good bill passed, but the governor vetoed it. So this issue plays itself out in different ways in each state. So looking at this through your eyes, the eyes of legislators courageously leading on the front lines here, could you tell us what's next for the pro-life movement in your state as a whole, understanding this is a long-term effort. Success doesn't always happen overnight. What's next for the movement in your state there, and what encouragement would you give to people to get them involved?
We can't stop the fight. I know that sometimes when we look at blue states, we say, well, that's it, we're not going to bother with our time there or our resources. And we can't give up. We can decide to move to a red state or a state that we think would be more pro-life, but that's not what we need to do. What we need to do is firmly entrench ourselves where we are, and we need to fight for where we live. I grew up in Rhode Island all my life. I can't imagine myself anywhere else. I want my children to grow up in a state in which we respect life, and I would tell you that as a political newcomer, I never expected to run for office. I was never a dream of mine. I never aspired to be a politician. In fact, when someone in the House had approached me, I said, politics is dirty and I don't want to get involved. And she said, but in order to make a change, you need to get involved. And you can go to all the rallies and advocate, but if you're not in the room where it happens, then you're really not as effective as you could be. And I would implore you, if you can run for office, run for office. If you cannot run for office, support a candidate that you know is on the right side of life. Because when it comes down to it, I would look at candidates and see the candidate as a whole. And then I came to the realization that if a candidate is not on the right side of life, can I trust them to make any other decision? Probably not. And so I would say if you can't run for office, then support a candidate, either financially. If you can't support them financially, you can follow them on Facebook, comment on their posts, share it. If you are not on social media, you can hold a sign at a polling location. You can host a sign at your home. You can host a little get-together fundraiser for that candidate. Whatever you can do something. And we need to be very active in the political realm.
Thank you. Representative Jackson.
Yes. What's next for myself in Louisiana is we're going to continue to push toward advocating for women's health. As an attorney, I always encourage everywhere I go for people to advocate for women's health. I first explained that Roe versus Wade should be overturned. We understand where the Supreme Court is, but it did not say we could not legislate in the area of abortion and women's health. So just like the admitting privilege bill for us, it was an advocacy for women's health. Because in Louisiana, every other surgical center, regardless of how minor the procedure, has to have admitting privileges. So we're not lowering standards for women's health in any area. So that's what's next for us. What we've been doing, we're going to continue to push, but also advocacy was very important, taking the fight outside of the state capitol, going into churches around our communities and talking to the pastors. My story is similar to yours, is that I attended church every Sunday, Sunday school, midweek service, never heard abortion. I'd heard the scripture in Proverbs that said God hated the shedding of innocent blood, but no one in the church ever aligned it with the killing of babies, which is what blood is more innocent than a baby who hasn't been born into a world of sin and who's known no sin. And so now we're reaching out to our pastors and advocating, and now they're talking about it. So imagine if that pro-choice person had been sitting in a church since they were 1 and 2 years old and hearing that God hated abortion. I don't care what party or what race, what religious affiliation, if they had heard that, a party or a political machine would have never been able to convince them that abortion was right. And so advocacy is so important. And that's truly what's next. We're going to continue our legislation, but we're taking our fights back to the streets, back to the churches, and encouraging advocacy at every level. You hear from the voice of elected officials. It needs to come from the voice of those who God has appointed to represent him, and it needs to come from the voice of babies. And that's what we're doing. Thank you.
We will go ahead and carry on with the pro-life legislation that we introduced this year, which is the dismemberment bill, and also the abortion pill reversal, a second chance at life. They will probably be vetoed in North Carolina. So what we need to do more than anything is get a pro-life governor that will help us with this. And we have one who is our lieutenant governor, so I'm going to work very hard to get him in the governor's mansion, and he will work with us, and he will help us get heartbeat bills, everything through that we can get through, because he is very pro-life. What will you need to be doing in your homes and my constituents? I encourage them all, first of all, to pray. Because without God's guidance, we will never win this fight. He has to be leading us. Help your pregnancy centers, whether it be financially or with, and hopefully you have pregnancy centers in your area that keep women from going to the abortion clinics. But if you can financially or support them with your volunteer hours, that's very important. I love the idea. I wish that our state were totally pro-life like Louisiana as far as our legislature. North Carolina is really a conservative state, but we have very liberal legislators that and the governor that just will not give into even conservative constituents. But if they hear from you and hear from you, that's what they need to, and don't wait until a bill comes through. Write them every day, send them a text, send them an email, let them know that you want pro-life legislation to pass. And just just love God and love those babies.
Well, that concludes our panel. I want to thank our participants for their leadership, their input, and their leadership on such an important topic. So as we close, could we give them a round of applause and thanks for everything that they're doing?